Hey again. We're going to talk about triads in this session. We might even get into harmonizing the major scale, which is the basics of diatonic chord theory. We will definitely do that. So before I start though, I wanted to apologize for my little rant on the use of a certain conjunction to start sentences with. That's very popular. I don't like it, but so what? I'm not going to change the world. I have my own favorites I start my sentences with. And also, I wanted to address that I had mentioned in the intervals last week, I mentioned a minor ninth and a major ninth instead of calling it the minor second and major second. So that might have been confusing in context. They're actually the same thing, and we'll get around to that when we talk about the compound intervals as you go up higher in the scale. It's just terminology. A friend of mine, when he found out I was doing a series on some basic music theory, he said, "Do we really need that with so much Theory 101 out online now?" And it's a great question, and I don't have a great answer, except I'm enjoying doing this for a few folks that might be able to benefit a bit from it. Different strokes for different folks. I mean, perhaps some of the way I think through things and explain it may connect with an individual more so than another approach. It's the same material, but approach from slightly different vantage points. There you have it. I have no good answer except I'm having fun. I hope that someone gets something out of it. And if you don't, just feel free to blast away at me, okay? So anyway, here we go. We're going to get into it now. Okay, so a few little warm-ups, arpeggios, based off of the harmonized major scale, which we will get into very shortly. First and foremost, last time we talked about two-note chords, we talked about intervals. A lot of people, that's what people call, sometimes they'll call the two-note chord an interval. A couple of things I forgot to mention are combining the two-note intervals or the diads to create different sounds. For example, we're in C here now, so if you wanted to extend that a little bit, sort of with that chordal embellishment, kind of a la Hendrix or Curtis Mayfield and everybody now, but so that is combining two-note intervals back and forth. Maybe I'll leave it at that. Another thing you can do with bends to create those intervals. So let's say you wanted to do an F chord. Resolve that to the C. Again, two-note chords. Go up to the G. So anyway, a lot you can do with two-note chord embellishments. They're used all the time, and I'm sure you know a lot of them yourselves. Okay, on to triads. So you've got three notes, and last time I talked about building a scale off of one string by moving up whole step, half step. But you can, of course, you can go across the neck. It's a lot more efficient, and that's a typical way of playing for us. So let's say in first position C. There's our C major there. Now, if you take that scale and you stack thirds above each note, and I'll show you in a moment what I mean, About it. Let's take a keyboard, and most of us are familiar with the keys. So we're going to be dealing mostly in C major, all the white keys, and keep it simple. So we're going to go from C to C, that's one octave. And if you take the C major scale and run it up from C to C, if you skipped every other note, you'd have a third. Okay, so there's another third, and so forth. For triads, and this is in root position, so that the first note of the chord is the root of the chord in this application. For triads, we're going to stack these notes up, stack them in thirds. Okay, just like that. So on the guitar, you could lay it out in many ways. Just for visual sense here, I'm going to use the fifth string as our home base and move up the C scale on the fifth string like I did with the D scale last session. So we've got a C major to start with, and that's just by skipping every other note in the scale. 1, 3, 5. Okay, again we're numbering the scale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then you go to this next degree, the second degree, and do 1, 3, 5 off of that, 1, 3, 5 off of that. So what happens when you start stacking those notes in threes on top of a major scale is it forms a pattern of a major chord, a minor chord, a minor chord, major chord, minor chord, diminished chord, and major chord. Okay, and it's actually spelling out 3 of the 4 types of triads that are available to us. Let me just jump over to the key of G here for a moment and show you what I'm talking about. If you take the G triad, which is G, B, and D, that's the 1, 3, 5 of G, and you lower the third, now you have a minor triad. I'll go back up to the major, minor. Now if you were to lower the fifth as well as the third, you'd have a diminished triad. To minor, back up to major. So there's one chord that is not spelled out when we use the diatonic method. By diatonic, that just means all the notes within the scale without going outside of the scale. So the major scale in this case. So diatonic to the key of C that we were in, we found there was a C major and a D minor and so forth up the line until we got to B, and that was a B diminished. Well, there's one more chord in the triad quartet here, so to speak. It's an augmented chord. Okay, so let's go back to G for layout here on the neck. That's G, B, D, and now we're going to raise the fifth. There's G, B, D. G, B, D sharp. Okay, so that's a chord that is not created naturally within the diatonic harmonic structure, but it's one of the 4 groups of triads that we're going to be working with. Now, let me just show you for a moment here. Did you notice when I play the G to a G augmented, there's a strong pull that wants to do something, and so what we're doing is it's called voice leading, where within a chordal structure a melody's popping out at you so strong you can't keep it down. So this kind of corny maybe, but so you've got a G, then you got a G augmented, then you have a G sixth, and then keep climbing up. That's a G7. Okay, we haven't gotten to the 7th chord yet. Then you'd go over to a C chord, and you could back to G, then D7. So that's a little bit of voice leading. That's beyond the triads right now, but it's still really basic stuff. You've played that in much more complicated stuff. I just wanted to point out what voice leading is. Here's a chart of what we just talked about. You have your major triad, 1, 3, 5, minor, and the various ways you'll see that written as a chord symbol, even a minus sign. That's the way I make it. And then an augmented, AUG or a plus. That's how that sounds. Then the diminished, and sometimes that's written as a little O after the chord name. Then you've got the sixth chords, major 6, minor 6, and then and you've got the 6, 9 chords. Sound like that, a little bit more jazzy, but you can spread them out. And then we talked about the sus chords, the sus 2 or 4. We talked about the add chords, which is a triad, major triad with an added ninth. You'll see that oftentimes. And then you've got these weird hybrids, you know, like the D add 4 or D sus 4 add 3. It's a 3 and 4 together. Great chord. Then just to recap, I figure like it feels like we're going back to school here. I don't like this. But you've got the major scale. I extended it up to the A so you could see some of the higher compound intervals. And this is what we talked about last week. You've got a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, seventh, an octave. I write that as 8 VE, a ninth, and then the 10th is not an official interval, but then you've got the 11th and the 13th. The 10th is just an awesome sounding interval, so I popped that in there. Now, today we talked about the triads, and there's the C major scale, 1 octave, stacked in thirds. Okay, so again, stacking. The last thing I want to say about triads or chord building is it's pretty important, and you probably already know. We opened up the session with some kind of spread voicings or leaps between intervals. Okay, so the reason I wanted to demonstrate that is because when you build a chord, you can take the pieces of the chord, which are the main ingredients, and you can mix them up however you want. There are inversions that we could talk about later on. Basically, you can take one note out of the chord and raise it an octave, lower it an octave, etc., until you have some pretty spread out sounding voicings. And so let's arpeggiate the chords at least, starting with C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and then back to C major. Until next time, adios, amigos.